When you hire my service after doing it yourself, you're going to invite me to your wedding.
That's
Basically what's going to happen.
Tell us a little bit about you and what you do. And of course, I know I've worked with you and getting some leads and stuff, but tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you do first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So my name's Nicholas Nick. That is my full name, first and last. A lot of people think it's like a pseudonym or like a Facebook name. Not the case. I am very Greek. So that's where that came from. And, I've definitely been, a very fortunate person most of my life. I've always been an optimist, and I don't necessarily know why. The home I came from wasn't necessarily filled with optimists at the time, and so it's really been, I've had such a cool journey, and one thing I learned at a young age was that I kept perceiving everything negatively. And like anytime something was going to happen, I was like, but what if the worst thing ever happened? And I realized I'm also a very I love balance, right? I really do. And I realized it probably took a couple hundred times, but I was like, this feels so unfair, for me to only imagine a negative result. And at a young age, I started imagining a negative result and a positive one. And what started happening time and time again is it was actually the positive one, and it's like, oh, well, what if they laugh at me? Well, what if they like me? Well, and it's like, before you know it, you do that 30 times, and guess what? And the positive thing is right. You stop thinking about the negative thing.
That's brilliant.
And it's like yeah. And I tell you, I really taught myself that probably around the age of 13 to 15, and that was my biggest lesson from there. Beyond that, I was a restaurant manager for 13 years. That kind of gave me my work ethic. I'm not scared of shit, and pun intended, as a restaurant manager, I've actually touched more shit than I care to admit.
Wow.
To be completely honest with you. Yeah, when someone shits on the floor at a restaurant,
I've got to ask, what type of
somebody's gotta
restaurant?
clean it up.
What type of restaurant?
Well, you'd be surprised of all the restaurants that the floor gets shit on in. But I ran all kinds of them. I ran IHOPs for a while. I ran Panera Bread for a bit. I ran a couple of high-end sports bars around Tampa called like Leroy Selman's and stuff. And then, some Dunkin' Donuts as well. I remember my first day ever at IHOP. My first day ever, someone pooped on the floor.
Wow.
And,
it's quite a memory.
I was like, well, yeah, yeah, hard to forget. And that was my first time that had ever happened to me. But yeah, so, when you get used to literally picking up shit, you can really get used to anything. And, when you're not scared of that, and I became like hungry for growth. I became like hungry as horrible situations. As a restaurant manager, you really have to be hungry for them because they're coming at you no matter what. You might as well flip it on its head and say, come and get some, and that was kind of my mindset, running through the restaurant years.
Yeah. Wow.
That was cool.
How many years was you in that industry?
13 years. And I averaged 60 to 70 hours a week. I managed the whole time. My first management job was $28,000 a year at 65 hours a week. I'll never forget that job. And that boss was so disrespectful to me. And it's like, not only am I making a quarter of my effort, but I'm also being treated really poorly as well. And I'll never forget that. But I think I peaked in the restaurant career at $65,000, which was actually a lot of money for a restaurant manager. At least back then it was. This is about 10 years ago. And I became somewhat of like an area manager. They had me floating around to all the restaurants and working with them, and it was pretty cool. But the reason why I left, I just realized that like I was superior, like I realized there was a lot of people that were coasting through life, there, and I was listening to audiobooks, and I was getting to work, and I was using those teachings on the employees to see if I could get more productivity out of them, and and all this other stuff, and I really, when I first quit, I really hated that I spent 13 years doing that. I really beat myself up for a long time on that.
How do you feel about it now?
Well, now I realized I was pouring the toughest concrete into my foundation that nothing and no one could ever take away from me.
That's a good realization.
Yeah. Dude, I've been through, and that's why I think when I run lead mining in the business, people are like, how do you provide such amazing service? You're just how do you answer your phone when it rings? I had a guy call me at 10:30 at night the other day, and he goes, holy shit, you answered.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, man, I'm just watching Netflix. Might as well make some money.
Well, let's get into that a little bit here. I want to talk more about that in just a second, too, with Lead Mining Pros and what you're doing there. And, of course, giving everyone who's listening an opportunity to be able to come, use your services, because they are definitely some things that I want to share. Some of our mastermind use them as well. So thank you for the service you provide over there. What took you from the restaurant industry to now you provide leads? Was there a area between there that was real estate oriented, or what?
So when I left the restaurant industry, I knew I was greater, and I refused to take another job in the restaurant industry. So then I ended up applying for a job at this place called Clever Investor. It was awesome. They were a great education company, and I had no idea what that even was. I've been flipping burgers for 13 years.
What? And what year was this?
I quit restaurants when I was 30, and I'm 38 now. So 8 years ago, 2015.
Wow. And not even that long ago.
No, that's right. Yeah. Not even that long ago, and I worked there. They actually hired me. I couldn't believe it. And they hired me as like an event coordinator, throwing events and stuff.
How cool.
Well, even though I was unemployed for 3 months in between that stint of restaurants to where I'm at now, that was tough. Especially working 70 hours a week to working 0 hours a week. I'm like, I'm ready, But I got the job, and it was really awesome. Within 3 months, I catch 3 promotions. I become one of their executives on overseeing their entire mentorship program. And this is where I first got my taste. And if you think about my life as a restaurant manager, I'm brought problems every 5 seconds, right? And what I've learned is solving problems. I don't just solve them in restaurants immediately. I solve them everywhere now. Restaurants was just the example I had. The skill is problem solving.
I want to interrupt there and mention something you just said. There's something I pick up from a lot of people, because you said earlier you felt you'd wasted 13 years used to, right, when you left there. Except you realize that the same skills, and frankly any of our listeners, the same skills you've used in the most difficult times of your life to solve problems or to get better is the same skills you then used at Clever Investor to get better. That's incredible.
No, and thank you. And you know what I call things like that? I call them our Bible stories, right? And it's like we grow up our whole lives and we hear these Bible stories and we hear these tales. And the truth is we're living our own tales right now. We have our own folklore that we're creating. And I'm blessed with optimism, like I mentioned earlier. So I'm able to look at my past and feel optimistically about it.
Right.
But I do respect and have grace for myself that that's not common and that is rare. And so I think a big part of my journey is being able to look at these things and see how they benefit me and not let the weight of waiting 13 years to quit crush me. And instead, now I'm in this new environment, and the new problem was, Nick, how do we get our students leads cheaper? Right? Direct mail is a very expensive lead. Direct mail, easy leads. No one's arguing that. No one's arguing the easy lead of a direct mail lead. However, the expense of the easiness comes at a cost.
Right.
And, our students began to struggle. And I didn't know anything back then, but I'm like, well, what's free?
Right.
You know?
Right.
What? What? And you know what's free? We already pay Verizon $75 a month, for cell phone service. So I implemented a hand dialing strategy where all students just get the list, get it skip traced, and dial by hand. If you don't have the money to do direct mail, dial by hand. And our customer satisfaction went through the roof because of that. And it was really cool. So when that job came to an end, as all jobs do, I ended up realizing, I was like, I know cold calling works. I know it works. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to cold call. And I went home and I cold called every day myself, 300 to 600 dials a day for the next 3 to 5 months.
300 to 600 dials. That's a lot of dials, brother. Was that on your cell phone, or was that like Mojo Dialer or something?
So I did hire Mojo right away. I was on a triple line.
Smart.
Right away. Yeah. You definitely don't want to be dialing by hand if that's what you're doing. Like when you I'll tell everyone right now, if you just want to test it out, dial 100 people by hand, knock yourself out. When you decide this is what I'm doing, you have to get a dialer. You don't have the time to dial by hand.
And I want to make the point too, because like in our mastermind, we have people, of course, some of them use your service that we'll talk more about in a minute, and others of them pay for inbound leads, variety of ways. We're talking to only a handful of people. So we're getting those hundreds of dials thanks to you and other inbound lead sources. We get those dials out of the way, except for someone who's starting from zero or close to it, there is a strategy that can turn you a check so that you can hire those sources. That's a very important note. Yeah. And I love what you just shared there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the best clients we have are ones that cold call themselves. They love us. They're like, how'd you get 2 leads and 500 dials? They're like, I've called thousands of people and 2 leads on 500 dials. That's average, to be honest with you, for us. But, that's also the difference of having a business versus being an individual contributor.
And I want to clarify too, for anyone listening, when, I talk about like in our mastermind dialing for sale by owners, those are already people who said, hey, I have a house for sale. When you're dialing people who you bought on a list that whatever, they just happen to own a house. So only a piece of them are even thinking about selling.
Ours is they own a home they don't live in. That's what I prefer to cold call. Own the home they don't live in.
You're getting how many percent of those people, if you dial 500, are you getting on the phone?
Right now our contact rate is through the roof, and we're averaging company-wide right now 10.9% contact rate, which means
that's high.
About 11 people are picking up on 100 dials, and that's a lot of conversations on 100 dials.
So 500 dials, you're getting almost 55 people to answer the phone, and out of 55 people, how many may have likely even a house for sale? Before we even talk about motivated.
Right. Yeah, so I will say it does depend on the caller. I can't even tell you guys. This is what I was saying earlier about the individual contributor versus a team. When I've got 9 cold callers and we've now been open for 6 years, I get to see what's happened over 30 employees over 6 years and compare that to my current 9 cold callers. And one thing it allows us to do is have a much higher standard. So I'll break down some real nerdy numbers for you real quick. Okay.
Awesome. I'm ready.
Yeah. And I know my numbers. I'm very meticulous. I'm a big math nerd. Okay. So my team right now is averaging 1 lead in every 189 dials that they are executing, which is huge. Okay. Now, if you figure the math we just did, what did we say about 11%? That might be 18 conversations. Okay. So let's do some nerdier math. Maybe that's 6%, 7% of people that we're talking to are actually interested in selling, And the beauty of the cold call lead is we can catch their hesitation, right? And why I like cold calling, if I just speak on that briefly, is direct mail reminds me of a slot machine. Right? You go in, you pull the lever, hey, okay, all right, the leads come out, right? But it's not a very scaled approach. There's not a lot you can do other than have several offloading strategies. There's nothing you can do to improve the numbers. What I like about cold calling and text messaging is it's more like blackjack, where your skill set in the game can actually improve your results. Doesn't matter how much direct mail you send, you're still going to deal with your percentages because other people are sending the same kind of direct mail. So you're still like hoping to get there. But my cold caller can be better than everyone else's cold caller. And if they're better, they get the conversation. And that's why we offer Americans, because they're better.
That's a very good point. And I have a few more questions about your cold calling. Before we delve into that, what brought you then from Clever Investor, where you was working with them? You mentioned you come up with the cold calling. Is that where Lead Mining Pros was born from? Was that you creating that strategy or implementing, I should say, that strategy?
Yeah. So what actually happened was, when I was a cook in a restaurant, I wanted to be a manager. When I was a manager, I wanted to be an executive. And then when I was an executive, I was like, well, this ain't that much fun either. Okay. Guess what? All my dreams still aren't coming true. Okay. And when I realized that, and then that job came to an end, I made a deal with Cody. And that deal was that I will go home and cold call every day in your community. Every day. And I will show them that I'm going to change my life, that their former director of fulfillment is going to do the business live in front of you. And that was really cool. So I did these calls every day for about 2 or 3 months, amongst other minor responsibilities I had. I was working from home for him at the time. And it was just awesome. People started calling me up. Hey, I see you're cold calling. Do you think you could call for me? Do you think you could call for me? And then one day, it's a true story, I picked up 3 clients. I did call Cody, and I asked him his permission. I told him what was going on and want him to think that, hey, I'm serving a couple students. I want you to know, And then one day, I make a post inside of a Facebook group, and it blew up. I said, I don't normally do this, but I'm offering all American. To be honest with you, I was the only cold caller at this time. Okay.
One man band.
I was like, yeah. And I was like, I'm offering all American cold callers, and this is really unique. We offer foreign now, but we didn't even have them for 2 years. Our first 2 years, we were all American, and that post, we got 287 comments on that post. And the next day, I got 20 people signed up, officially paid, signed up. And then I called up Cody and I put in a month notice. And I was like, I'm doing this.
How many years ago was that? Or what year was that?
That was 6 years ago. I worked for 2 years for Clever, 2.5. And then I founded Lead Mining. We're in the 6th year right now for Lead Mining.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, I think I started first used your services 3 years ago now, close to it.
Yeah. Wow,
it's been quite some time. So back then, I guess you were only American callers.
Yeah.
And now, what's the difference? So for those who want to come, first off, where do they find your services?
So leadminingpros.com is where you guys can find me. The company name is Lead Mining Pros, and just saying .com, might as well tell them exactly how to get there. And just so everyone knows too, the phone number on there is my cell phone. So if you call that, it goes right to me. So feel free to reach out if anybody has any questions. But yeah, leadminingpros.com is how you guys get to me.
That's awesome. Now, for someone who's not used your services yet, what's the difference of the packages between the American-based cold callers and the foreign-based cold callers? What does that look like? What's your difference in results? What's the difference in price?
So what I tell people really is simply this. The Americans are the way to go if you are in a suburban, a rural market, or you're focusing on land. Okay. And if you are in a known saturated market, like a metropolitan area, then I would highly recommend just going with the foreign callers. And the reasoning there is, if you know leads are going to come sparingly, why put the more expensive person on the phone? I don't think it matters as much. If they're in Phoenix, Arizona, American or foreign doesn't matter. Okay? They're getting so pounded by calls from everybody. It's just luck. It's just like a direct mail campaign. It's just luck if you're the one that they call back, in a sense,
Makes sense.
Yeah. And then the Americans do perform at least twice the rate. So I told you I know my leads per hour. Last week, the Americans were 182 dials per hour. Excuse me, dials per lead. Okay, that's how many dials it took for them to get one lead, 182 on average over 44,000 dials that we did. So we generated about 241 leads last week on 44,000 dials, which comes up to 182 leads per hour. And the foreign team was about 400 dials per lead.
Twice as many dials.
And so that's right. Yeah, and a little over. It's actually about 2.2 to 2.8, And the Americans are exactly twice the price. So the way I look at it is, at twice the price, you're better off, unless you're in the metro, unless you're in the metro area, then I'm all in on the foreign with you.
That's interesting. And what do you qualify as a lead?
A lead for us is anyone who considers selling. I think that this is something that, I try to tell people, and this is a great lesson for everyone. So a lead is anyone who's ever considered selling. Now, I ask 12 additional qualifying questions, but I do not qualify the lead as in say, he shouldn't get this one. This one doesn't look hot enough. And I'll tell you right now, you don't ever have someone qualify a lead for you. If it's not a lead, hit the delete key and get over it. Okay? Don't be like, that, because as soon as your cold caller gets scared to send you a lead, they're going to start sending you way less leads.
That's an important point, because if you're having somebody to do a pre-screening call for you, and for those like in my community, they know I have an acquisition is who closes the deal for me. That's much different. But if you're expecting the person who's pre-screening to only send you 12 leads that said yes, they'll take payments and nothing down, that's not a cold caller. That's an acquisitionist that closes the deals for you.
Right.
That's a very important distinction, because I know on your leads, it takes us a few more of calling your leads, of course, naturally, to close a deal than it does, say, somebody who has filled out our form online from a pay-per-click marketing. So this is just another tool in your tool belt that, pay-per-click marketing, sometimes you can put more into ad spend, except you can't always control the flow of which they come. You come around Christmas or around election time, pay-per-click's probably screwed because your cost is going way up.
Because everyone's dollars are in there.
Exactly. And when it comes time to cold call, you can turn that on. Anytime we want more leads, we just send Nick money, and a few days later, we start getting flooded with leads.
Yeah, I love that.
It's a good way to turn on the faucet. So what would you say to somebody who's in the beginning stages of their business, or maybe not in the beginning, just needing more leads? Because that's something we get in our community a lot. People just need more leads. What's the word of advice that you have for them?
You have a time versus money equation, right? And I think it's really important for you to think about that. If you've got the money, and if you're in a suburban or rural market, hiring a service like mine is going to be an amazing decision, okay? If you think you're in a saturated market and you don't have the money, then I would definitely get very familiar, do the legwork, and start getting some personal experience. And the coolest thing about cold calling is make 50 calls and you're like, all right, I'm getting pretty comfortable. I'm getting pretty comfortable talking about real estate. And so if you're new, I strongly suggest just going. It's tough. I'm going to say this a lot easier than it is to do. That phone's going to look like it weighs 1,000 pounds.
I was going to say, after 50
but,
calls, they're hiring you regardless of what you say.
Yeah, that's tough. It's tough. I will say I didn't have someone cuss at me for what felt like a month. But one thing I will share with all of you guys as a tip is, if you do start doing the work yourself, is always make sure you're in the mood to do it. If you're not in the mood to cold call, do not cold call. It's going to reflect in your numbers. It's going to reflect in your KPIs. You want to be in a good mood. You want to feel outgoing. You want to be ready to overcome obstacles. I used to get so excited when a person would start with an attitude and I would flip them.
Right. Oh, that's the game. That's fun.
Right. It was such a blast. And you know what I learned is some people push on you as a test. They're not being disrespectful. They're like, are you cool to hang with me? Can you take my first market I ever cold called, true story, was New York City.
Oh my goodness. Why the torture yourself, brother? My goodness.
Well, my partner, and even worse, my partner had all these leads, and they were from what's called a shock and awe campaign, which was a letter that looked like they were getting sued or something, and then it gets them to call in. So I'm literally calling the angriest people in the angriest city. Okay. And I got good at it. But, that's a part of the thing about doing it yourself, is you get a little hardened, you get a little appreciative. When you hire my service after doing it yourself, you're gonna invite me to your wedding.
That's
basically what's gonna happen.
So is it a requirement you don't allow people to sign up till they've made at least 50 cold calls, or what?
Yeah, it should be. I can tell you they're so happy. I can totally tell when someone called their own leads before they hired us. Then I have other people. I had a woman get 7 leads on a $200 investment and call me and complain, and I was like, I wish you knew what Sally's campaign looked like yesterday. It's like people would die. And that's the woman who's got to go make, 50 cold calls and stuff. And, but I've gotten much better to, even on my side. I have a great onboarding process that explains the whole process to people, what to expect. How many leads is a lot of leads, because I've learned that, if you don't tell people, then, they see 7 and they were like, well, should I have gotten 20?
Right. Well, and I think
they don't get
part of it is interesting, and you are doing a great job of explaining, is what qualifies as a lead, because that's huge. Because I've had people come in and believe that a lead, because I talk about pre-screened leads, as in yes to terms, no to terms, level of call. So we have this whole system, whereas if they're cold calling campaign, that's a whole different style of lead versus pay-per-click versus. So knowing that expectation up front is vital. And I love, again, that this is another tool that they can put in the tool belt.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's all expectations, and I think the biggest struggle my clients come up with is the ability to call the leads that they get. They don't, like, I can tell you right now, I can meet with the client and I can tell within 10 minutes if they actually called the leads, and I do offer, so everyone knows too, I do offer weekly one-on-ones completely free to all of my clients. And this is a great opportunity for us to discuss your KPIs. If you have a bunch of leads, I work with you on your acquisition systems, so I make sure that if they're like, I'm just giving cash offers, I say, well, you need to be incorporating creative financing,
right,
and novations, like it's like, if you're just a one-trick pony, you're going to close deals that much less often. If you have 3 tricks, you're going to close 3 times more often as you learn the strategies.
That's such an excellent point, because I have wholesalers or various people come into our community that Leo and I have, where we have them often that do get leads by the dozens or the hundreds and have one type of offer: quick cash, wholesale the deal. And when you can add those strategies, like of course we do, 75-80% of our business is creative, you can add these other strategies, your close rate goes up, your profit per deal, from my experience, everything goes up.
Yeah.
That's another huge aspect and value that you offer. So that's incredible.
Yeah, and as a consumer too, they want options.
Absolutely.
I remember this is a great trick people use on kids, and I was a part of a kid's life for a couple years, like from 3 to 5, which was really cool. And one thing the mother taught me was don't tell him what to do. Don't say go brush your teeth. You want to say, hey, do you want to clean your room or brush your teeth? You know. Now, no, well, I guess I'll clean my room. Okay, great. Well, we still got to win here, And I think that sellers are a lot like that. If you walk up to them as a one-trick pony and they don't feel like they have options, I think you also increase your probability of losing or disappointing that lead as well.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you so much for joining us today. You continue
Thank you,
to
man.
value, the few times that we've met has just been a pleasure. And I was excited when you'd reached out that you had time, or I guess we'd reached out to you. When you responded, you'd be able to take the time to be with us.
I'd love to.
Thank you for being with us. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners today, Nick?
I would just say while we're on topic, have a process for your leads. Respect that process. Call every lead within 30 minutes of it coming in. Call every lead no matter what the notes say. Have a great attitude about that lead. And then have a solution no matter what direction that lead's going. If they say fuck off, we got a fuck off solution. If they say I want to sell solution. And I think a lot of people look over that. And when you create that system, respect it. Don't deviate from it. Keep doing what is working and stop doing what isn't working. And that was really sage advice in about 30 seconds. You guys might want to go back, but it's really important.
Definitely want to re-listen to that because that was important. The speed of which you call a lead is going to determine your close rate. And the speed in which you stop doing what's not working and you pour more gas on the fire that is working is going to transform at what level your business grows.
Absolutely.
That's powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
No, man. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much for watching. And if you like that video, hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss any more. Comment below what you got out of it. It'll help with the algorithm so we can continue to spread incredible information to awesome entrepreneurs just like you and spread the message. Thanks for all the support.